The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of my heartbeat. I stood alone before the judge, facing Aunt Eleanor and Uncle Richard, the people who once tucked me in at night, now accused of stealing everything I had. Their lawyer smirked as I opened the thick folder labeled Hartwell Trust Fund, $640,000 withdrawn. My voice didn't shake. "You taught me about trust," I said, eyes locked on theirs, "by breaking it." 7 years of law school had led to this moment, not to pass the bar, but to bury their lies one clause at a time. I still remember the envelope. It was plain, beige, nothing remarkable, just another piece of mail sitting on the counter next to a half-empty coffee mug. I almost threw it away. But when I saw the bank's logo in the corner, I tore it open. Inside was one line. "Account closed, remaining balance $0." For a few seconds, I just stared at it. Then my hands started shaking so violently that the paper crumpled between my fingers. That money, my trust fund, was supposed to be my safety net, my future. It wasn't a gift, it was my grandparents' last promise to me. I called the bank immediately. The man on the line hesitated when I gave my name. He cleared his throat and said, "Miss Hartwell, the account was closed 6 months ago by your legal guardians, Eleanor and Richard Hartwell." My guardians. The words sliced through me like ice water. I whispered, "Are you sure?" He sighed softly, almost apologetically. Every authorization was signed. The funds were fully withdrawn. I could barely breathe. I called Aunt Eleanor next. Her voice was syrupy sweet, polished like always. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "It's all fine. The market's crashed. We had to move your money somewhere safer. Don't you worry." When I asked for documentation, her tone sharpened. "You don't understand how these things work, darling. Let us handle it." I called Uncle Richard. He didn't bother pretending. "Stop panicking. You'll thank us later," he said, then hung up. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor surrounded by old bank statements and family photos. I noticed the patterns I'd ignored for years. Eleanor's new diamond necklace, Richard's sudden obsession with golf trips, their remodeled kitchen that gleamed like a luxury ad. I'd told myself they were just lucky, or that maybe they'd inherited something too. But deep down I knew. They hadn't just taken my money. They'd stolen the only illusion that kept me safe, believing family couldn't hurt you. For days I barely slept. Every thought circled the same truth. They did it because they could, and because I trusted them enough to make it easy. My grief curdled into something heavier, colder. That night, I looked at my reflection and whispered, "If they could rewrite my future with a signature, then I'll learn how to rewrite theirs, with the law." I didn't know it yet, but that was the exact moment my revenge began breathing. I didn't tell anyone what happened. How could I? No one wants to hear that the people who raised you stole your future. So I packed what little I owned, a suitcase, a photo of my grandparents, and that single bank notice, and left Tacoma before sunrise. The city of Seattle greeted me with rain and silence. It smelled like wet pavement and second chances. I rented a tiny studio above a coffee shop. The paint peeled, the heater rattled, and the window leaked every time it stormed. Still, it was mine. For the first time, I didn't owe anyone anything. I worked 3 jobs, morning shifts at Starbucks, tutoring at night, and data entry until my eyes burned. Every paycheck barely covered rent, but the exhaustion dulled the ache inside me. I wasn't healing. I was hardening. One evening, while cleaning tables after closing, I found a crumpled newspaper left behind. The headline read, "Law Student Wins Case Against Guardian Fraud." I read it 3 times. Something inside me sparked, a dangerous, thrilling kind of clarity. If the law had protected them, maybe it could protect me too. If they'd used it to steal, I'd learn to use it to reclaim. That night, I applied to the University of Washington School of Law. I sold my grandmother's watch to pay for the application fee. It hurt to let it go, but the truth was, sentiment hadn't saved me. Knowledge might. Law school became my exile and my obsession. While others partied, I memorized case law. While they dated, I highlighted fiduciary clauses and studied every loophole in trust management. My classmates thought I was intense. They were right. I wasn't there for a degree. I was there to build a weapon. Every late night in the library, surrounded by flickering fluorescent light and the smell of old books, I imagined their faces, their calm smiles, their false concern. Each statute I mastered felt like another brick in the fortress I was building between who I was and who I was becoming. Still, there were nights when loneliness clawed at me. I'd stare at my reflection in the library window and whisper, "You're doing this for her." The her I meant wasn't me, it was the girl who once believed family meant safety. By the end of my second year, I could recite the Washington Trust Act word for word. But one night, as I sorted through old documents again, a name jumped out at me. CMJ Consulting LLC. A company I'd never heard of, yet it appeared again and again in every transfer record tied to my trust fund. My pulse quickened. For the first time in years, I didn't just have pain. I had a lead. Law school didn't just teach me about justice. It taught me about systems designed to protect people like my aunt and uncle. At first, I thought I'd enrolled to learn. But somewhere between the lectures and the sleepless nights, I realized I was studying to rebuild myself. Every statute, every case citation, every cross-referenced law became a piece of armor. I spent my mornings in class, my evenings at the library, and my nights sifting through the ashes of my past. While other students flirted and laughed in the cafe downstairs, I lived among old paper and quiet rage. The smell of printer ink replaced perfume. Highlighters became my war paint. My apartment evolved into something between a crime lab and a confession booth. Stacks of folders lined the walls. Sticky notes covered the mirror until my reflection disappeared behind evidence. Each note carried a clue: dates, amounts, initials. EH for Eleanor Hartwell. RH for Richard Hartwell. And again, one name I couldn't ignore: CMJ Consulting LLC. I didn't know what it was, but instinct told me it was the artery feeding their greed. The deeper I dug, the stranger it became. Shell transactions, routing codes, transfers made at 2:17 a.m., all within seconds of each other. Money that vanished only to reappear weeks later under different names. It was deliberate, practiced, almost elegant. I spent an entire semester focusing on corporate law just to understand how people built these invisible empires. Every professor saw me as driven. None of them knew what truly drove me. One night, while researching digital authorization systems, I found an article on electronic signature fraud. A simple tool, a Wacom digital pen, could replicate handwriting so accurately it fooled most verifiers. That's when everything locked into place. The signatures on my withdrawal forms weren't forged with ink. They were forged with technology. I remember sitting there under the flickering library light, whispering, "You were clever, but so am I." From then on, my studies became war strategy. How to subpoena hidden records. How to expose falsified documents without alerting the perpetrators. How to turn their precision into their undoing. My internship at the Seattle Civil Legal Center taught me how fragile justice could be when money decided its reach. Clients cried in my office, clutching eviction letters, unpaid wages, medical bills. Every story echoed mine: trust, betrayal, and silence. It fueled me. I promised myself that one day I'd be the voice for people like us. But first, I had unfinished business. By the time I graduated, I had built a case so detailed it could have been a novel. But it wasn't time to publish. Not yet. I wanted them to relax. To think the past was buried. To let the dust settle, because the quieter I stayed, the louder my return would be. So I moved back to Seattle. Same rain, same skyline, but a different woman behind the umbrella. That night, I stood by the window of my new apartment, city lights reflecting off my law degree hanging on the wall. For the first time in a decade, I smiled. "I'm done studying their crimes," I whispered. "Now I'm ready to prosecute them." When I returned to Tacoma after nearly a decade, the air smelled the same: pine trees, ocean salt, and the faint sweetness of betrayal. The streets hadn't changed. But I had. The house where I grew up still stood on the hill, its white paint now dulled with age. Aunt Eleanor's roses bloomed along the fence line, trimmed with her same obsession for appearances. Behind the curtains, I could see silhouettes moving, hers, his. Comfortable, unworried. They had no idea I was back. I didn't knock. Not yet. Instead, I started quietly, visiting the Pierce County Records Office, the local bank, the notary who once handled the trust paperwork. Every document I touched added another brick to the wall I was building between them and their freedom. By the end of the week, I had reconstructed 10 years of their deception into a single binder labeled Hartwell versus Hartwell, Case Preparation. Still, I needed to see them to remind myself why this mattered. 2 days later, I walked into a grocery store near their neighborhood. I didn't plan it, but fate has a cruel sense of timing. I turned the corner, and there she was, Aunt Eleanor, holding a basket of imported cheese. She froze for half a second before her mask returned. "Oh my God, darling, look at you!" Her voice was sugar over poison. I smiled. It's been a while. I didn't mention law school, didn't mention anything. Just watched her eyes scan me, searching for weakness. When she leaned in to hug me, I let her perfume cling to my coat, a scent I'd later remember when I faced her in court. Uncle Richard appeared from another aisle, grinning like the ghost of my past. "Didn't think we'd ever see you around here again," he said, half mocking. "Oh, I couldn't stay away forever," I replied, voice soft, steady. They didn't realize the chess game had already started. Over the next few months, I moved pieces in silence. Filed quiet motions. Requested document subpoenas. Opened a civil complaint under the Washington state court system, naming both of them as primary defendants. I represented myself. No firm, no partners, no backup. When the court papers were served, the clerk told me she'd never seen anyone smile like that while filing a lawsuit. I told her, it's not anger, it's relief. The news traveled fast in town. Eleanor called once, leaving a voicemail thick with disbelief. "What are you doing? We're family." I didn't respond. Because family doesn't drain your life savings and call it love. Instead, I focused on the details. Every forged document, every wire transfer, every financial footprint they left behind. My evidence spoke louder than any apology they could ever fake. The night before the first court date, I laid my file open on the table. Every page, every signature, every transaction sat there under the glow of my desk lamp. 10 years of silence distilled into one moment of power. Outside, rain tapped against the glass, steady and rhythmic, like applause for the storm about to begin. Tomorrow I'd walk into that courtroom alone. And for the first time in my life, I wouldn't be the orphan they pitied. I'd be the reckoning they never saw coming. The courtroom smelled like old wood and tension. Rain tapped against the high windows, steady and relentless. It felt fitting. Seattle had always known how to mourn quietly. When the bailiff called my name, I stood up. Across the aisle, Aunt Eleanor adjusted her pearl necklace. Uncle Richard smoothed his suit, pretending composure. Their lawyer, a man with a perfect smile and an expensive tie, barely looked at me. In his eyes, I was already the loser. He opened with confidence, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding between family. My clients acted responsibly in managing a trust for their niece, and she's simply misinformed." The judge nodded, taking notes. When it was my turn, I rose slowly, steadying the papers in my hand. "This isn't a family matter, Your Honor," I began. "It's a fiduciary violation in a case of calculated embezzlement." The lawyer chuckled softly, the kind of laugh meant to belittle. "Miss Hartwell, are you sure you're qualified to—" "I am," I cut him off. "Graduated top of my class, University of Washington School of Law. And yes, I'm representing myself." The room went quiet. I walked to the evidence table, opening a thick binder. Inside were 10 years of records, pieced together like a confession. "Exhibit A," I said, handing the first file to the clerk. The original trust withdrawal forms, each one carrying my signature. Except this signature wasn't written with ink. It was replicated using a Wacom digital pen connected to a signature pad. The defense lawyer leaned forward, frowning. "Speculative." "Not quite," I replied, pulling up a large printout. "Here's the metadata from the file. It logs the pressure and stroke velocity, proof it was generated electronically, not handwritten." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Continue." "Exhibit B," I said, flipping to the next page. Bank transaction logs from the Hartwell Trust Fund. Multiple withdrawals at 2:17 a.m., all transferred to CMJ Consulting LLC, a company owned by Richard Hartwell. The gallery stirred. Someone gasped. Uncle Richard's face turned the color of chalk. He leaned toward Eleanor, whispering something sharp, but she kept staring at me, expression unreadable, almost impressed. The lawyer tried again. "Even if that's true, it doesn't prove intent." "Exhibit C," I said, voice calm but cold. "The incorporation documents for CMJ Consulting. Filed 6 months before the trust was closed. Same address, same phone number as their home. Silence. The kind that tastes like fear. Then I walked to the projector and pressed play. A video feed from the bank's security archive flickered to life. Eleanor and Richard stood at the counter, signing digital forms, smiling at the teller. The timestamp the same night my account vanished. The defense lawyer muttered something about coincidence. The judge didn't buy it. I turned back toward my aunt and uncle. "I trusted you," I said softly, not for the record, but for me. "You told me family was forever. You just never said whose future you were funding." For the first time, Eleanor's mask cracked, her lips trembled. Richard looked like he wanted to disappear. The judge cleared his throat. "Miss Hartwell, I've seen enough for today. Court will reconvene tomorrow for deliberation." As I gathered my papers, I could feel every eye in the room on me. The bailiff called for recess, but no one moved. Eleanor reached for her purse. Richard stayed frozen, face pale, hands shaking. I walked past them slowly, stopping just long enough to whisper, "This is just the beginning." Outside, the rain had stopped. The courthouse steps glistened under the weak sunlight. For the first time in years, the air didn't taste bitter. Tomorrow, I wouldn't just expose their lies. I'd watch them crumble beneath the truth. The next morning, the courthouse was packed. Reporters waited on the steps like vultures smelling blood. Inside, whispers floated across the gallery, words like fraud, family, betrayal. I sat at the plaintiff's table, a single pen in my hand, my case file laid open like scripture. Across the aisle, Aunt Eleanor and Uncle Richard looked smaller than I remembered. Their lawyer was already sweating before the judge even entered. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. I stood first. "Your Honor, I'd like to begin with a clarification," I said. "This case isn't about inheritance, it's about intent." The defense attorney rose quickly, his confidence trembling. "My clients deny any malicious—" I cut him off. "Then perhaps they'll explain these." I clicked the remote, the courtroom lights dimmed. On the projection screen appeared a set of financial statements, enlarged for every eye to see. Transfers from the Hartwell Trust Fund to CMJ Consulting LLC, repeatedly, over the course of 3 years. Each transaction timed at night, outside of banking hours, routed through sub-accounts registered under Richard Hartwell's name. I advanced to the next slide. "Here, Your Honor, is the company registration document, signed by both defendants. Filed 6 months before the trust was liquidated." The lawyer scrambled to object. "Relevance?" "Relevance," I replied, "is intent and pattern." The judge nodded. "Overruled. Proceed." I turned to face the jury. My aunt and uncle didn't make a mistake. They made a system. Then came the emails. Printed copies showing Eleanor coordinating transfers, discussing tax shields and temporary diversions. Her signature at the bottom of each message. Her arrogance preserved in digital ink. As I read aloud one message, her voice trembled behind me. "That's taken out of context." I stopped mid-sentence and looked straight at her. "The context," I said quietly, "is theft." She fell silent. Next came the bank surveillance stills. Eleanor and Richard together, signing digital documents, laughing with the teller. When the images appeared on screen, a wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Richard's composure broke first. He slammed his hand on the table. "This is twisted. We raised you. We paid for your school." I didn't flinch. "You didn't pay for my education," I said. "You funded it, by accident." The courtroom burst into whispers. Even the judge hid a smile behind his notes. The defense lawyer tried to salvage something. "My clients may have made poor financial decisions, but to suggest criminality—" I interrupted again, this time holding up the RCW 11.98.078 statute. "Under Washington law, any trustee who knowingly converts or conceals funds for personal gain commits a felony breach of fiduciary duty." They didn't make bad choices, they made illegal ones. Silence hung in the air like fog. The judge leaned forward. "Do you have any final remarks, Miss Hartwell?" I looked at my aunt and uncle, 2 people who once told me they loved me more than their own children. Now they couldn't even meet my eyes. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I don't want vengeance, I want truth to have consequences. Because if love without integrity is excused, then justice loses meaning." For a long moment, no one moved. The judge nodded slowly. "Court will recess for deliberation." As I gathered my papers, Eleanor finally spoke, her voice cracking. Why are you doing this to us? I paused by their table. I'm not doing this to you, I said softly. I'm doing this because of you. Outside the courthouse, rain had started again, thin silver threads streaking across the marble steps. Reporters shouted questions, flashes flickered, but I barely heard them. Each drop of rain felt like a heartbeat, each flash like a closing chapter. That night, alone in my apartment, I replayed every detail, the faces, the silence, the words. The evidence was done. The case was closed in spirit, if not yet on paper. Tomorrow, the verdict would be read. And for the first time in 10 years, I'd finally sleep without fear. Because whatever happened next, they'd never own another piece of my life again. The courtroom was quieter than it had ever been. When the judge returned, the sound of his gavel cut through the air like a heartbeat. All at once, every whisper, every breath, every doubt faded. He began to read the verdict slowly, each word deliberate, almost merciful. In the matter of Hartwell versus Hartwell, the court finds the defendants, Eleanor and Richard Hartwell, guilty of breach of fiduciary duty, financial fraud, and unlawful conversion of assets. The words landed with the weight of a lifetime. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hands shook. Richard's shoulders slumped. Their lawyer stared at the floor. The judge continued, voice firm but calm. Restitution in the amount of $640,000, plus accrued interest totaling $180,000, shall be paid in full to the plaintiff. Furthermore, the defendants will face a separate criminal investigation for falsified financial records and digital forgery. There it was. 10 years of silence reduced to one sentence of truth. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. A deep, quiet breath that felt heavier than any victory shout could ever be. Eleanor turned to me, eyes wet, lips trembling. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered. Her voice cracked like old glass. I met her gaze for the first time in years. I think you meant to help yourself, I said, and you just never stopped. When the bailiff escorted them out, the gallery shifted. No applause, no noise, just a quiet, collective understanding that justice had finally chosen a side. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters called my name. Miss Hartwell, how does it feel? I didn't answer. Because there's no word in the dictionary for what it feels like to get your soul back. I walked down the courthouse steps as rain began to fall again, soft and steady, washing over my coat like absolution. A woman I didn't know stopped me near the sidewalk. She must have been 60, maybe older. She said, "My son took my savings too. I never fought back." Then she smiled faintly. You made me wish I had. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just my story, it was everyone who'd ever been betrayed by someone they loved. When I reached the bottom of the steps, I looked back one last time. The courthouse doors closed slowly behind me, heavy and final. It didn't sound like an ending. It sounded like closure. That night, I sat by the window, city lights flickering below. Seattle was quiet again, the storm finally gone. I traced my fingers over the edge of the verdict copy lying on my desk. Justice didn't feel like revenge. It felt like balance. And in that balance, I finally found peace. A year later, the world had moved on, but I hadn't forgotten. The headlines faded, the whispers died down, and their names slowly vanished from every conversation in Tacoma. But mine began to mean something new. Hartwell Legal Aid. That's what I called it. I rented a modest office in downtown Seattle, one floor above a bookstore that smelled like dust and hope. The sign outside the frosted glass door read, "Justice served quietly." It started small, one client, then 3. Most were women, retirees, or people who trusted too easily. Every story sounded like an echo of my own: a brother who emptied an inheritance, a caregiver who drained an old woman's account, a husband who used love as a ledger. I listened, I advised, and I fought. Not out of anger anymore, but precision. Because I'd learned that revenge burns fast, but justice endures. One afternoon, an elderly woman named Mrs. Adler came in clutching a folder of crumpled receipts. Her son had taken her retirement savings under the promise of temporary help. She never saw a dime again. As she cried softly across from me, I reached across the desk and held her hand. Her skin was thin and trembling. "It's not too late," I told her. Her eyes lifted, a mixture of disbelief and longing. No one ever said that to me before, she whispered. By the end of that month, we'd won her case. When the restitution check arrived, she tried to thank me. But I just smiled and said, "Don't thank me. Thank the law you thought was out of reach." After she left, I sat alone in the quiet office, sunlight spilling through the blinds. It felt different this time. No adrenaline, no vindication. Just peace. The kind that comes when pain finally finds purpose. Sometimes I still pass the courthouse on my walk home. The steps are the same. The air still smells like rain and resolution. But I don't look up at the windows anymore. I don't need to. I already know what justice looks like. It looks like me, standing tall, steady, unafraid. People ask why I named my firm after the family that betrayed me. I tell them because the name doesn't belong to them anymore. It belongs to what came after them. The girl they tried to break is gone. The woman they created took her place. And every time I lock my office at night, I whisper the same words to the empty hallway. You didn't destroy me. You drafted me. They say revenge makes you feel powerful. Maybe that's true for some. But for me, power came when I no longer needed it. I used to think justice was loud, something you had to shout or fight for with everything you had left. But I've learned that real justice is quiet. It doesn't scream. It simply arrives, steady and certain, when the truth finally outweighs the lie. People often ask me if I've forgiven them, Eleanor and Richard. The truth is complicated. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give to the person who hurt you. It's the peace you reclaim for yourself when you stop letting their shadow define your light. So yes, in a way, I have forgiven them. Not because they deserve it, but because I do. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Love without integrity isn't love. Trust without honesty isn't trust. And silence, when chosen instead of fear, can be the loudest answer of all. Sometimes I still get letters from people who watch the trial on the news. They tell me about the betrayals they never spoke of, money stolen, promises broken, families torn apart. They ask how I found the courage to fight back. The truth is, I didn't start brave. I started broken. Courage just happened somewhere in between. So if you're listening right now, if someone has taken something from you, whether it's money, dignity, or peace, remember this. You don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to stand even if your voice shakes and say enough, because sometimes the quietest revenge is simply rebuilding yourself louder than their destruction. And maybe that's what heartless really means. Not cruel. Not cold. Just free from the hands that tried to shape your story for you. So what about you? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? If you had the chance to take your justice back, would you? If stories like this one speak to you, stay with us at Heartless Revenge. Because every story here reminds us of one simple truth. Justice doesn't always come easy, but it always finds its way. This was my story. I'm heartless, but not without reason.